Population shifts in the U.S. could make it increasingly difficult for Democrats to win the presidency and House majorities after the 2030 census. Caroline Vakil, staff writer here at The Hill, joins us to discuss her latest reporting. Hey, Caroline. So, the gist of it is that people are moving from blue states to red states. Where is this happening, and how will that impact the Electoral College and the House map?
A lot of big questions. Great to be with you, Drew. So yes, we are seeing from 2030 population estimates, and I want to emphasize these are estimates. A lot can change between now and 2030. We are seeing population decline in New York, in California, and several other, battleground and bluer states, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota. And we're starting to see a couple of Sunbelt states that are starting to grow their population, most notably Texas and Florida. They're both expected to gain a couple of seats. Arizona, Georgia, they might be others that gain maybe a seat. And so what does this all mean? Essentially, it means that there are a lot of different math movements here. For the Electoral College, it means that there is going to be increased importance on Texas and Florida. And Democrats that I've spoken to have said that Democrats are going to need to fix their infrastructure problems in those states. They can no longer afford to leave them off the table because those are going to be increasingly important for their Electoral College math. If they don't win them, they're going to have to find topsy-turvy kind of math to essentially win other states to win the White House and the Electoral College here. So there are a lot of stakes with some of these population estimates right now. What it means for the White House and also for the House majority in some ways still is a little bit murky. With the House majority, there are a lot of moving pieces. Of course, we're going to expect that Texas and Florida, for example, are going to be gaining House districts. It seems like right now in Florida with the voter registration trends that it's trending more Republican in the state, but Democrats are hopeful that the population shifts in Texas might actually create a more purple Texas. Obviously, there's a lot of time between now and then to understand what that all exactly means for the House.
In recent presidential elections, the Rust Belt has been such a focus. Essentially, the last three election cycles, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania have really decided the winner. But it sounds like with these shifts, the Rust Belt might not be the deciding factor the way it has been in these recent elections.
You're exactly right. I mean, we're thinking about increasing math. It's a math problem that we're still trying to figure out essentially, because if Texas and Florida are going to be gaining Electoral College votes, essentially Democrats are going to have to compete in these states. Otherwise, they are losing a key number of votes from the Electoral College side, and they're going to have to figure out how to recreate their path to victory elsewhere, which is going to be quite difficult. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts that I mentioned earlier. One of them is that one thing that experts have kind of noted to me is that we're kind of assuming right now that the sort of political coalitions and the way that states align right now politically, we're kind of assuming right now that that's all going to stay stagnant. Essentially, red states are going to continue to be red states, blue states are going to continue to be blue states, that coalitions are going to stay the same, and that's not necessarily the case. So we do have to take some of this with a bit of a grain of salt, that there could be a lot of other moving pieces that Republicans may have to think about as well. But we can clearly see that Florida and Texas are going to be very critical components for both the White House and House majority heading into 2032.
When you talk to Democrats, what do they say about competing in places like Texas and Florida? I mean, Texas has been this place where they have these candidates they think are going to perform well, and they end up getting their heart broken on election day. In Florida seems like it just keeps getting further and further out of reach for Democratic candidates.
So, it is a wake-up call. I mean, I had one Democrat who literally said they had to get their substituting this word, but crap together, because
They're bleep together.
They're bleep together, essentially, yes, because, for example, in Texas, talking to one Democrat there, they said that you need to have a strong state party, a strong donor table, strong campaign committees that are essentially going to be recruiting high quality candidates and creating an infrastructure for them to, create aggressive and professional campaigns. Democrats are a little bit encouraged right now, including in Florida. They have started to field some more competitive candidates. Of course, we saw the Miami mayoral race play out. That was quite notable for Democrats there. Alexander Vindman, who is running in Florida Senate, is a strong Senate contender. The party is starting to see some strong candidates. You're seeing the same thing kind of starting to play out in Texas with James Talarico, for example, and Jasmine Crockett potentially in the Texas Senate Democratic primary. So there are some signs that Democrats are taking this seriously, but there's a lot of infrastructure that's going to need to be, kind of rerouted, rejiggered, and donors are going to need to wake up to the fact that these states just can't be ignored anymore.
One thing you write about in your story is that the population growth in these states is focused around urban centers and people of color, and that could lead to more potential purpling of those states. Talk about how the notion of where the growth is actually happening and what demographic groups are actually growing could impact the political makeup of those states.
Absolutely. So, Democrats have started to see this population shift into urban centers, for example, in Texas. And I think there is hope among Democrats that that's going to mean that there's going to be growth, creating more urban centers, which are more likely to identify with Democrats. More voters of color, more working class potentially. And so I think there is a hope that this will translate into maybe more likely Democratic voters. And Democrats think that even with Texas, that doesn't have an independent redistricting commission, that they're going to sort of run out of places to try to gerrymander because the electorate is going to be shifting so much. But again, another thing that we kind of have to think about, Latino and Hispanic voters, for example, they swung for Trump in 2024. They were seen as more of a reliably Democratic voting bloc before that. They've started to swing back towards Democrats again, but we're kind of making this assumption that some of these voting blocs that Democrats have traditionally relied on, they're becoming swingier. So even if we're seeing more, more voters of color congregating into cities in the South, like in Texas, Democrats obviously have to be wary to the fact that that's not necessarily going to mean that they're translated to automatic Democratic votes. These coalitions are ever evolving, ever changing. And so while it looks good potentially on the surface for Democrats in some of these states, they can't take those coalitions for granted heading into the next decade.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm a Republican, I'm probably licking my chops at that this demographic shifts. I mean, the notion that California, New York, and Illinois are losing population, and Texas and Florida, other Sunbelt states where Republicans have traditionally performed well, are growing. I would think that would be music to their ears.
In a lot of ways, it is music to their ears. I mean, particularly on the Electoral College side. I mean, anytime that you see growth in traditionally red states, particularly Texas, talking about, because Florida has only more recently become what we've seen as a more traditionally red state. Yeah, they are excited, but Republicans and Democrats alike are not taking these estimates, which again, heavy emphasis on estimates and these ultimate, variables that are playing out. I mean, you've got the math number of the population estimates, but the political environment is sort of running parallel or running, cross current to the numbers that are playing out. So even though on the surface, for example, like with the Electoral College math, like this might seem good for Republicans, if you have an electorate that is changing, diversifying, maybe becoming purpler, that might not necessarily be good news to you. And also, I would like to point out that this Texas Senate, State Senate seat special election that happened earlier this year, Democrats won and flipped a Trump won district there. And so I do think that we are seeing signs of Democrats being competitive in areas that maybe once before maybe were off the table. Perhaps that's related to 2026 in the midterm environment that feels very anti-Trump, but it could also be the changing political dynamics in the state. We just have to see.
I want to ask you about Arizona and Georgia. These states fascinate me. They're kind of the new swingiest of swing states. If you look at Arizona, two Democratic senators and a Democratic governor voted for Trump in 2024. Georgia, two Democratic senators, Republican governor voted for Trump in 2024. Will these be the states in the future that we're staying up late into the night, maybe into the next day on the presidential election day, counting ballots and seeing where the numbers have to come in for as we get down to the wire because the votes there are so close?
I would say fairly likely. I mean, they're so swingy, and with an electoral college math issue that we're sort of still trying to figure out how that math is going to shape up in 2032. Those are states that Democrats and Republicans can't take for granted. Now, whether or not Republicans can create a red wall and run up the numbers in a bunch of states, there might be a possibility that perhaps they don't have to worry about one or two of these more swingy states if the electoral math works in their favor. But still, I mean, this is always a game of inches. And so these are not going to be states that either party can take for granted, particularly with, sort of the changing demographics. I mean, they still play a huge part in the road to the House majority still, even if it's not on the electoral college side. So we can expect that the parties will be, continuing to focus on some of these critical battleground states.
I was struck by this quote that you had from Justin Levitt. He's a professor at Loyola Marymount University at the law school. He says that things are sufficiently politically fluid for partisans right now that I sure wouldn't want to be making any bets as to which states are going to be red states and which states are going to be blue states 6 years from now. What is it about the volatility that he sees there that you really couldn't predict a state's political direction 6 years from now? Because that seems like something that usually you can predict something like that, but he seems to be saying that this is a particularly volatile time.
I mean, it's, we sort of have to think back to Florida and Ohio for a moment. These used to be quintessential swing states for the parties. Now they've kind of been taken off the table for Democrats. That's sort of one example of how these states just change over the years. I mean, the sort of coalitions and the states that you build with, they're going to change naturally as populations move around, as coalitions change. Different voting blocks might vote for a particular party and then become more swingy. We're definitely seeing that with many different, voting blocks, people of color, for example. I mean, you've got young men who have been trending more Republican. Younger people in general used to be seen as more Democratic strongholds. So I think that's what he's pointing to, is the sense that even though right now we think, for example, that a state like Florida or Ohio once maybe were swingy states, that doesn't mean that down the line they might become farther away from Democrats' hands in the future. And the inverse can be true. For example, just making up an example here, Missouri is a more Republican-leaning state. What happens if population changes and it becomes more purple or more Democratic? It's kind of hard to read into what all of this means until the actual decade unfolds. And I think just to add one more layer to it, we have to make sure that the US Census is conducted properly. This is predicated on the assumption that all of these states are going to be counted accurately, which has been a big problem. There's been a lot of concerns that a citizenship question could be added to the US Census, which could discourage Hispanic and Latino voters, for example, from being able to correctly self-report. And so if Republican and Democratic states don't get their counts right as well, that's also terrible for them on a whole host of issues, economically, but also politically. And so that's why, there are so many questions and variables, and why it's kind of hard right now for us to kind of get a sense of how likely is it that a state is going to stay this way 5 years down the road. We don't even know what's going to happen, in a week or two. I mean, that's how volatile the news cycle has been, let alone the next 6 years.
Yeah, the increasing politicization of census and census counting is going to be something we will have to continue to follow. But for now, we'll have to leave it at that. Caroline Vakil, thanks so much for your insight.
Thanks for having me.